The crowds came in record numbers and filled stadiums across the nation. They came with great expectations and were not to be disappointed. For this was the beginning of a new decade, new rivalries, the first year of the merger between AFL and NFL. But above all, it was professional football, the sport with the flash, dash, and thrills custom made for the new America, the now America. In 1970, pro football had grown so big that it bubbled over to weeknight contests. Sellouts, every one. In 1970, more people watched pro football than ever before, and many of them will long remember that this was the year the game renewed itself. The year when all the elements of excitement came together in perfect amounts to make 1970 that one vintage year.
Another new stadium that opened in 1970 was San Francisco's Candlestick Park. Now, it wasn't so much that I disliked Candlestick, it's just that I really loved Kezar. That's the stadium the 49ers left behind. To me, Kezar was the perfect place to play football. Good sight lines, it was intimate, and it was right in the city. A lot like Franklin Field, where I watched the Eagles when I was a kid. Kezar was a neighborhood stadium. Fans walked to the games. It was 4 blocks from Haight-Ashbury and 1 mile from the Golden Gate Bridge. Kezar had it all. It had tradition, character, atmosphere, and some damn good players.
64 from Oregon, Dave Wilcox. At middle linebacker, number 57 from Michigan, Frank Nunley.
Frank Nunley, number 57, was the middle linebacker of the last 49er team to play in Kezar. And his nickname was one of my all-time favorites, Fudge Hammer.
Sitting across the line from Joe Namath or Johnny Unitas, and they'd wink at you and they go, Fudge Hammer, Fudge Hammer. You know, just to kind of get you going. I was a prime example that you didn't have to have a beautiful body to play in the National Football League, because I was always a little pudgy. But Stan Hyman said I was a sweet guy off the field and hit like a hammer on the field. So he named me Fudge Hammer. It was nice to have somebody with not the greatest body in the world that was still a pretty good player. And the average guy could identify to me.
Typically, San Francisco handled the demise of Kezar with class. Today, the old scoreboards and some of the stands remain. And Kezar lives on as a city park that honors its past.
And what a great place. Look at this. This area around here is just, you know, phenomenal. And then, you know, of course, the flower children were in full bloom back in the late 60s and early 70s. This was the Haight-Ashbury district. This was the most famous show place in the world where everybody could come and get angel dust and get themselves blown out. And there's probably still a few laying around here someplace. Kezar Stadium was definitely a San Francisco treat. There was 48,000 people that came to every game. If 98% of the people in the world are sane and you have a 2% lunatic fringe, we got that 2% here all the time. You know, everybody that came here was a different type of a dude if you ever met him. We used to come out through a tunnel. They had this big chicken wire, a big wire screen over the top of the tunnel, and I was standing next to John Brody and said, hey, what's a chicken wire? And he says, you'll find out. About 2 minutes later, 3 or 4 guys threw a beer bottle off and broke it over the chicken wire. Everybody knew not to stand next to John when you're getting introduced. But we had some really great battles here on this field. We were actually very disappointed that we were going to have to go to Candlestick, to be honest with you, because, you know, in 1970 we played Dallas right here, and the last game ever played here, to go to see who was going to be in the Super Bowl. We really wanted to come back and play here a couple more seasons so that we could get to that Super Bowl out of this stadium. And when we got over to Candlestick Park, we were kind of disappointed because it was supposed to be this fancy AstroTurf. And what it turned out to be was just pure, solid cement. We were playing on cement. you could tell from the first day that we set foot on it that it was not good for football. So the game was played higher. It was played about 6 inches higher. So as opposed to, running down low and getting a hit on somebody and rolling into the dirt, you were rolling on cement, and it would just the whole game was just played differently. Kezar was a football stadium, and Candlestick was a baseball stadium that was altered to play football. I always would envision that maybe San Francisco might come back and put this thing back together. You never know, with all the new theme parks and everything going on. Well, I enjoyed playing football here at Kezar Stadium, and football was a little bit different back then. There wasn't as much money involved. I think we had a heck of a lot more fun. Most of the people I talk to today say it's turned into a business. And this certainly wasn't a business for any of us guys that were playing at that time.
So you'd keep things the way they were, or would you like to switch places?
No, I'd like to make some more money.
The miracle men of the AFC West resided in Oakland. Chief Wizard, 43-year-old George Blanda. The Raiders were unbeaten in their division, as against San Diego, Blanda kicked the winning field goal with 4 seconds remaining. Exit Chargers. The Denver Broncos, with a hard-nosed defense and a good offense, won their first 3 and led the division. Then they met the Raiders and went home victims of shell shock. In Denver, it was George again, when with time almost gone and Oakland trailing, he threw for the winning touchdown. Exit Broncos. And it was the perils of George Blanda again when Oakland trailed the Browns with less than a minute. His pass tied it at 20. His 52-yard field goal cleared the posts with only 3 seconds remaining. Oakland 23, Cleveland 20. Against the Jets, the Raiders trailed with 1 second left when on 4th down, a new cast of Darryl LaMonica to Warren Wells pulled off the greatest of the Raider miracles. And while everyone Oakland met suffered defeat in unbelievable ways, perhaps the Chiefs lost most. They started 1970 as world champions and even led Oakland in their first meeting. But with 3 seconds to go, George Blanda, who else, kicked a 48-yarder to give the Raiders a tie that amounted to a moral victory. And when the two teams met in the game that decided the AFC West title, the Chiefs played as if they knew they were doomed. Exit Chiefs. Enter Oakland, the miracle-working division champions. In the first playoff game, the Raiders faced Miami and relied on their oldest weapon, the bomb. They downed the Dolphins 21-14 and headed for the AFC Championship. In New Orleans, the Saints lived up to their name and performed one miracle.
Tom Dempsey will try to kick the longest field goal in National League history. They're sending him on with 2 seconds left. Scarpetti will hold. Dempsey will have to kick one 62 yards to win the ball game. Holy daylight, I've seen them all, but this is the most exciting moment in Saint history. Here's the snap, the ball is down, Dempsey kicks, it's on the way! It is! Good! It's good! It's good! The Saints have won! The Saints have won! The stadium is wild! Dempsey is being mobbed! the Saints have won 19-17. Dempsey with a 63-yard field goal. The longest field goal in the history of the National League.
In Los Angeles, the Rams were older but seemingly tougher. Their defense humbled most opponents, but couldn't contend with the NFL's Cinderella team, San Francisco. After falling under the 49ers' spell, the Rams lost momentum and found one obstacle insurmountable. For in San Francisco, there was a John Brody, a Gene Washington, and a team that found the glass slipper comfortable. For the 49ers, it was their first championship shot, and they cast a wary eye at the thought of losing it. Everyone seemed to try a little harder. All year they were tough, but never any tougher than when in a frigid playoff game with the Vikings in Minnesota, they came away with a 17-14 victory. The 49ers then picked up their coach and packed for home and the NFC Championship. Now Dallas was in the NFC Championship at San Francisco. And finally, the Cowboys proved they could win the big one. They powered over the 49ers, became NFC champions, and headed for Miami and Super Bowl V. And for the Colts, the next stop was Miami and Super Bowl V against Dallas. Both teams had things to prove, and both played a tough game. The winner in the 1970 season's championship was still in doubt, with only 9 seconds remaining. And then rookie Jim O'Brien's field goal put an end to 1970. The Baltimore Colts were world champions. And as the final 9 seconds clicked off, you fans all over the country looked back on the spectacle that had been 1970. There had been excitement and thrills, incredible plays, and unexpected successes. You'd seen the beginnings of new stars and the fading of old ones. You'd seen expansion teams grow up and new rivalries flourish. You'd seen triumph and defeat. You'd seen the vast spectrum of the elements of professional football come together in a perfect rainbow blend to make 1970 the greatest year ever. And years from now, when the conversation drifts to football, you'll look back and you'll say to yourself, yes, I remember 1970. And if ever there was one, 1970 was that one vintage year.